Welcome and greetings. I'm Bob Vint, an architect from Tucson, and in practice here, I'm also a faculty member at University of Arizona as an assistant professor of practice. For the past 30 years, half my life, I've been part of the effort to restore the mission of Xavier del Bac, the oldest European building in the state of Arizona. There are older buildings. They're Native American buildings, stone cliff dwellings, the Hopi Mesas. But in terms of a building of European design and origin, the mission of San Javier del Bac is the oldest, built in the late 18th century. So welcome all conferees, ARCC Virtual 2021 Tour of Mission San Javier del Bac. The reason the mission stands where it does is it's along the river. It's on the west bank of the Santa Cruz River, so named by the Spanish when they arrived in the late 1690s, or the late 1600s rather. The first missionary to establish a church at Bac, as it was called, was the Italian explorer, missionary, cartographer, priest, Father Eusebio Francisco Kino. And he arrived in 1692. He found a village of 800 souls, as he saw it, living in a place called Huac, which meant wellspring. There was water coming out of the ground, which is why people were living there. So he founded a church there, named it for his patron saint, San Francisco Xavier, the Jesuit missionary to the east, to the Orient, to China and India. Kino was on the move. He was following the rivers of Sonora and Arizona, as we know them today, founding missions all along as part of the Spanish colonial conversion program. So the river is essential. That's why the mission is there. That's why Tucson is here. With no river, no mission, no city. Location map. The mission lies just not even 10 miles south of central Tucson. This is the map drawn by architects working for the Park Service in the late 30s, early 40s. As part of the Historic American Building Survey. We're very, very fortunate to have 41 sheets of ink on linen measured drawings done by unemployed architects put to work by the Roosevelt administration through the Historic Building Survey. We do know, for instance, okay, I jumped ahead a little bit here. The plan of the mission is that of a Latin cross. You can see the symbolism is clear. The sacristy is in this corner, the northeast corner, where the priests are robed before service. There's the sanctuary, the two side altars, the chapels, west and east. Moving down the nave, then you have the two towers, where you have walls that are 6 feet in thickness, built of brick and stone both. The stairways up to the choir loft and roof are tunnels in the middle of the walls. So it's this massive masonry building, also roofed with vaults and domes, which we'll get into later. This iconic image of the south facade of San Javier del Bac with the legendary unfinished East Tower, of which legends we will speak shortly. Never finished, and we'll talk about that. These are the not quite twin towers of Tucson, with a central facade that's ultra Baroque. It is established through research by the historian Dr. Fontana that the architect was a Basque, a Spaniard from the Basque country, Ignacio Gaona. The Habs survey thought Pedro Bojorquez must have built the building because his name was carved on the door of the sacristy. Later research suggests that he was the carpenter who built the doors. But in any event, the building stands there. 1797 is the year of completion, or rather the year they left off building it. The foundation was laid in 1783. The historic survey was overseen actually in Washington by a guy named Thomas C. Vint, who by no accident was my grandfather. And he was a landscape architect, actually, not a building architect, but he was overseeing the historic survey, which he helped to create. He helped to bring it through Congress. So I like to think it's not entirely an accident that it has fallen to me to work on the preservation of the mission. There's Granddad. I was only 8 years old when he passed away, so I didn't get a chance to really know him well. I was just a child, and I was more interested in hearing about his experiences flying planes in the First World War than I was in learning about architecture. But I've later come to read more about my grandfather, and my hope is to eventually write his biography. But he was one of the Park Service greats. One of his legacies is the Historic Building Survey. I mentioned the mission was founded by the Jesuit explorer and missionary Father Kino, who is in fact is up for sainthood. He was an extraordinary person, had a gift for languages, brought foodstuffs from the Mediterranean. He brought wheat. He brought fruits, peaches, figs, pomegranates. So he was bringing not only this Catholic religion, he was bringing Mediterranean, European culture and again agriculture to southern Arizona. For which reason he was welcomed by the natives, who welcomed a reliable food source. The book by Herbert Eugene Bolton. Bolton wrote The Rim of Christendom. He was an historian out of Berkeley. And this was sort of a Reader's Digest version of his life of Kino. Kino followed all these rivers, the Rio San Miguel, the Rio Magdalena, and then what is now the Santa Cruz River. You can see this whole region was called La Pimeria Alta, the land of the Upper Pima Indians, Pima is now known as Akimel O'atam, river people. Here in Tucson and at San Javier, it is the Tohono O'atam, the desert people. But Kino founded dozens of missions, many of which are still standing. Tumacacre, south of Tucson, is now a Park Service site. It's Tumacacre National Monument. If you have a chance to run south, it's well worth a visit. I think the grounds are open. The museum is not in pandemic times. And I'm a part of a Southwest Mission Research Center organization. We organize tours of the Kino missions of Sonora, which makes for a really intriguing 3-day trip to see 7 of Kino's missions in Sonora on your next visit to Tucson and Sonora. The first representation of the mission that we know of is a sketch by a California gold rush guy, Henry Powell, on his way to the gold fields, camped outside the mission in 1849 and made a sketch. And at that time, he was told by the villagers that the church was at least 200 years old. At that time, it was about 50 years old. People's memories are not what they ever were, right? So these are the domical pit houses, or ki, of the O'atam, and their wato, shade structure. This was basically the domestic vernacular architecture of the O'atam, inherited from the Hohokam. The Spanish were beginning to build some longhouses of adobe to define a plaza in front of the church when Mexico became independent of Spain and the Spanish priests returned to Spain. They left. The mission was abandoned in the 1820s. A more proficient artist who visited the mission 40 years after Powell was the renowned Frederick Remington, the Western artist who published sketches among the Papagos of San Javier in Harper's Weekly on the 2nd of April, 1887. The lifeways at that time were very traditional. The O'atam were still grinding food on their corn on metates and living in ramadas. Very traditional lifeway. This is the quail and hen coop. And there's a sketch of the mission. Now, amazingly, just a month after these etchings were published in Harper's, an earthquake struck southern Arizona, northern Sonora, and all the atrium walls around the mission, in front of the mission, fell over because the earthquake came from the south and they just toppled over. The mission survived largely intact, although several of the columns on the facade were shaken off in that earthquake. A couple more sketches by Remington, Home Sweet Home, very touching titles here. Quails and Hen Coop, coyote-proof indeed. 1871 is the first photo that we know of taken of the mission. Of course, millions have been taken since then. In fact, I think Xavier del Bac must be the most photographed building in Arizona, as far as I am aware. As you see in this early photo, the East Tower, not only was it left without a dome, it also was left unplastered. One of the legends for why the tower was never finished is that the architect fell from the tower during construction and died, and the locals were superstitious and didn't return to the work. And that has been thoroughly debunked by the historian Bernard Fontana. The second legend was that it was left unfinished so taxes would not have to be paid. There is still, to this day in Mexico, a rule that if a building is under construction, taxes are not due, property taxes are not due. So people leave a few rebars sticking out of the top of their column saying, I'm going to build a second floor someday to avoid taxes. That was not the case in Spanish colonial times. The actual story there is the mission period was supposed to last 10 years, and that's when the mission churches were built. The mission is not really a building. The mission is this period of evangelization and conversion to Catholicism, at the end of which the church would become secularized in the sense of becoming a village church And then the native people, having been converted to Catholicism, would become subject to the crown and begin paying taxes. So that's the story behind why the tower, why the tower was left unfinished. In fact, had to do with funds. The friars who were having the church built were paying people. They were trying to reestablish Spanish society in New Spain, and they were running out of money, and they borrowed money from surrounding ranchers, neighboring ranchers, for which they had promissory notes of crops of unplanted winter wheat to borrow 7,000 pesos to continue the work. They ran out of money, the artisans weren't getting paid, and they moved along to other village towns. Photo from just 9 years later, you can see further deterioration. The wooden balconies are nearly completely destroyed. Some of the masonry balustrades also have disintegrated. The foundation is eroded through nitrification, saltpetering. About this time, the mission belonged to the federal government, the United States having taken possession of these lands. And there was in Washington, D.C., a Federal Bureau of Catholic Indian Missions to which Xavier del Bac pertained. And they sent General William Tecumseh Sherman on a survey of the Western territories. And he visited the church in this year, 1880, and he wrote a report saying, oh, the foundations are in terrible condition. Something must be done or it will be a complete ruin. Early 20th century, in the midst of the first restoration, which was funded by the Bishop of Tucson, Henry Grandjean, a Frenchman from Lyon, and in fact had come out to Santa Fe and was sent to Tucson to be bishop by Bishop Lamy of Santa Fe. The East Tower, this is a hand-tinted, obviously, postcard, pre-color photography, but indeed the East Tower was still exposed brick. It's a primitive fired clay brick. It's not, in fact, a true adobe. There's lots of misinformation that the mission is built of adobe. It's actually built of fired brick with stone at the core of the walls. The 3 wooden balconies have been repaired or rebuilt, rather. We're still missing, let's see, actually we're missing 1, 2, 3, 4, we're missing 6 of the 9 columns that were on the engaged columns on the facade. And you can see here that the atrium wall and the mortuary chapel wall are missing. They toppled in the earthquake of 1887. Now, our little mission here of San Javier has intrigued and fascinated many people, including the art historian from Harvard, Brent Duell, who visited in the early part of the 20th century and even wrote a little book, Mission Architecture, exemplified in San Javier. Now, I'm not sure if that's a typographical error, exemplified, or maybe exemplified is another way to say that. But he made the first measured drawings of the building and published them in 1920. Here's Brent Duell in Egypt, Mastaba of Meraruca. He was an Egyptologist as well as fascinated by Spanish colonial culture. Again, the first floor plan of the mission showing this convento wing. Now, interestingly enough, the convento wing was added back after the church was finished, and it's made of mud adobe after 1800. So it's actually more primitive than the building built in the 1700s. Brent Duell figured out the sections. These drawings were the basis of the Historic American Building Survey, although they did take more precise measurements, with surveying equipment to more accurately represent the building. Again, you see this hemispherical dome over the crossing of the Latin cross. It's on an octagonal drum with quatrefoil windows. This is a detail of the interior cornice with this dental pattern and this marbleizing, sort of a attempt to make the lime plaster look like marble. Here you see the 6-foot thick walls with the stairway tunneling up inside to get you up to the roof. So from the ground floor, you come up to here, you keep going, you come over the window, and then finally you pop up on the roof. And this is Duell's conjectural, hypothetical reconstruction of what the mission might have looked like had it been completed, which it never was. Obviously, there was an intent to have a dome on the East Tower as well, and a little lantern on top of that. And Duell hypothesized that the church might have been decorated on the exterior in the same ultra-baroque that we see at the interior. This zigzag yellow and blue tile on the domes is, I've seen that actually, it's in Guadalajara in the cathedral. And he thought the exterior would be replete with color and ornament. This is indeed a statue of St. Francis Xavier, the patron saint. of the church, and we can discuss other facade details. But the thing that strikes me about this is it's representing, the friars as architects studying their plans, which is certainly fanciful. There were professional architects and builders roaming the Spanish borderlands, erecting these structures, but there was a time of a very romanticized view of history. But this is a very, a very accurate rendering of the niches and the statues of saints. The Third Order, which is the coat of arms of the Franciscans, and other details. These are the, if you've heard some legends of the mission, the famous cat and mouse in the facade facing each other off. The story being that when the cat catches the mouse, it's the end of the world, or the end of the building. As the building stood in 1940 during the historic survey, this is the desolation of the desert after all these years of disturbance. And it hasn't changed much since then, actually. It still has this very kind of isolated rural feeling because the Native American village of Bac has never developed into a modern town. Now, I should mention that the meaning of Bac in the Autumn language is spring. It's actually Wak in the Autumn language. They have very interesting, very soft and beautiful language. Tohono O'odham is beautiful language. Wak became Bac for the Spanish, and this is why the mission stands where it does. The mission as it stood 5 years ago, the plaza has been formalized and parking organized, but it's never really developed beyond that. Now, the church complex itself has grown. This is the 1800 convento where the friars lived up until actually the 1990s. This wing has a library and an archive, apartment for some of the sisters who teach at the school, church offices, and then this is a building from the 1990s. It's the new friary. It's only 25 years old, and I had the opportunity to design this for the brothers, the Franciscan friars of San Javier. So the mission stands. Today, it has the nickname, the White Dove of the Desert, which it acquired after the whitewashing given by Bishop Grandjohn. I think in the 1800s, it was probably the gray dove of the desert. But doves can be gray too, right? But it is a landmark. It's a National Historic Landmark. This building is recognized at that level. And there's an interesting passage written by Rayner Banham, the late great architectural critic, the British enfant terrible, who visited Tucson on one of his, as he called them, four-wheeled voyages, seeing architecture. Scenes in America Deserta. I just happened to have it here. And Rayner Banham spoke thus: "The environs of Tucson, Arizona have more to offer the desert tourist than does the town itself. The three great marvels of Tucson all lie away from the town to the west and south, and each is without peer in North America. The first historically and most renowned is the mission of San Javier del Bac, the White Dove of the Desert. It is, without quibble, the most beautiful man-made object in America Deserta. Whoever dubbed her the Queen of Sonora must have known that no one would dare quarrel." So this is the preeminent architectural critic who is giving his imprimatur to our little mission. He had the mistaken impression that the facade faced west, which in fact it faces south. Yes, he says, "Unlike the stately Gothic piles that elbow for preeminence as Cathedral of the Fenland in my ancestral part of England, San Javier del Bac is without equals or rivals, even among the other missions founded by Padre Kino." So there you have it, on the highest authority. Another view of the floor plan, rendered by yours truly. There's a couple of cross vaults in addition to the elliptical vaults. The center vault in the chapter room has two barrel vaults that cross to create a groin vault, as do the ground floors of the two towers. Cross section, again showing the arcuated construction, very modular, very systematic, very logical, very well designed and built building. Just fantastic. The thing that strikes me about the building is, the architecture is so integrated with the art. The structure creates the space on the inside, of course, and the form. And then the entire interior is replete with art. Rendering of the south facade. Here again, you see the volutes with the famous cat and mouse. The Third Order would have been a symmetrical facade were it not for Mexican independence from Spain. A detailed drawing of the facade that I prepared for Dr. Fontana's book on the art history of the mission, which is called A Gift of Angels. It's actually the iconography and the lives of the saints. So one thing I learned from Bunny is, in addition to St. Francis Xavier, all four saints in the niches on the facade are female. There is Santa Catalina, for whom our mountains north of town are named. Santa Barbara, whom I learned is the patron saint of architects. Santa Cecilia, the patron saint of music, I believe, and Santa Lucia, Saint Lucy. So it's an interesting, I don't know of any other Mexican Baroque churches where only women are represented in the facade. It makes it, again, that much more unique. Although I learned from Fontana's book that all four of these saints were virgin martyrs. So maybe not such a great deal to be on the facade of the mission, but a detailed view of that central facade. This is, unfortunately, what remains of the statue of St. Francis Xavier. By the 1960s, it had eroded to the point where someone went up with a bucket of cement and plastered him over. No one's quite sure who or when that was done, by whom or when. This is the Franciscan coat of arms, the third order, which we'll see in detail a little later. The lions representing the house of Leon y Castile, reigning house of Spain. This would be Santa Barbara. This would be Santa Cecilia. And the scallop shell over the window we'll talk about in a minute too. This is the famous mouse on the west volute of the facade, looking across at the cat. You can see signs of other animal infestation, pigeons and such. A detail of the third order. You see there are two arms crossed and nailed to the central cross. The bare arm represents that of Christ, the robed arm that of St. Francis, who was known in his life to experience the stigmata, the wounds of Christ. Then this is the Franciscan knot, or which they tie in their cord belts of their habit. It looks like a pretzel, right? It has three loops to symbolize the Holy Trinity. This is the coat of arms of the Jesuit, or the monogram, the IHS, which is the abbreviation for Jesus in the Greek. Maria Regina, Mary, the Queen of Heaven, the Mother of Jesus. And look at this ornament here. Here's some geometrical ornament done in red iron oxide that has echoes of indigenous geometries. The scallop shell is a symbol of St. Francis because St. Francis Xavier, he is known to have taken, St. Francis of Assisi, wrong St. Francis. They're both represented here. It's interesting. It's a Franciscan church, followers of St. Francis of Assisi, dedicated to the Jesuit St. Francis Xavier. St. Francis of Assisi went on the pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain. Pilgrims of St. James, Santiago, would bring a scallop shell with them to drink from streams on their travels and to beg alms. And even today, a scallop shell is a symbol of that pilgrimage. People get it as a brooch or a tie clip, but to this day, it's a Franciscan symbol, and it's right on the facade of San Xavier del Bac. Further bas-relief ornamentation on the restored West Tower. These are pomegranate blossoms. In Spanish, a pomegranate is Granada, the Islamic capital of Spain. And in the tradition, the Islamic tradition, the pomegranate is a symbol of creation. It's so full of seeds and potential. And I'm told that in the original story of the Garden of Eden, Eve didn't give Adam an apple, she gave him a pomegranate, and it's represented at the mission. This is the, again, kind of the ultra Baroque volute on the facade. While we were working on the restoration of the West Tower, the Ton Autumn masons and plasterers described this one as Dairy Queen. But it has precedent in nature, perfect nature, making this spiral shell in a conch shell from San Carlos on the Sea of Cortez, Sonora. Other elements of nature present at the mission. We're using a traditional additive in our mortars and plasters for the restoration derived from the prickly pear, or the nopal as it's known in Mexico. It's food grade nopalitos, the edible prickly pear, not the spiny desert prickly pear. Of course, it's a serious item of food in Mexico. Here we boil it and press it for the mucilage. And again, it's this, in a way, it's part of the symbol of Mexico, the eagle and the serpent perched on a nopal cactus. This is during the restoration of the West Tower a few years ago. There's a group of school children here sketching the building. The scaffold to access the tower for the work is over 80 feet high. The very top of the lantern on the West Tower tops out at 80 feet above grade level. And it's interesting, the current building code defines a high-rise as a structure where the highest floor is over 75 feet above grade. So by that definition, the west tower of San Xavier del Bac was the first high-rise in the state of Arizona. Here's Basil Murillo, one of the autumn craftsmen, boiling up the cactus pads to press and add to the mortar. It goes into every batch of both mortar and plaster. And we've analyzed it with a botanist at the U of A, Karen Adams, who reported it's full of pectin, which helps it set and also retards the drying time. It's basically a fluidifier, a retardant to slow the drying of the plaster, which helps it cure more thoroughly, because lime plaster has to combine with CO2 from the atmosphere in order to turn back into calcium carbonate as part of the lime cycle. And so the slower it dries, the more fully it can carbonate and cure. And so we've had really good results with the carbonation of the lime. And we believe that this traditional additive that's been used in Mexico for hundreds of years is one of the reasons. And I learned about the practice from my mentor and teacher, Jorge Olvera, restoration architect from Mexico City, with whom I studied. And this is used throughout Mexico by the INA, the Instituto Nacional de Antropología e Historia, which is the Mexican equivalent of our Park Service. It's practiced in all the Kino missions, and we've adopted that here. Much better than white Portland cement, we find. Much better than concrete bonding agent, which was used in the past. This is Freddie Garcia's working on repointing the mortar joints after removing the cement that was put on in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, repairing, and then if bricks have softened to the point where they're disintegrating, we need to substitute a replacement brick. And ththose are coming from Querobabi, Sonora, where the same bricks are made today as were made at the time of Father Kino. Under the cement, with cycles of wetting and drying and accumulation of salts, many of the, not a high percentage of it, but several of the brick do need to be substituted. Just putting back that which nature has worn away. It's primed with lime and plastered with lime sand plaster with nopal cactus additive. And we're getting this finish, which is maintainable. We can periodically lime wash it to renew it and protect the interior, which again is the whole point of the exterior of a building, is to create the interior. And our interior, with all the statuary and painting, original in situ Spanish colonial art, has been likened by Dr. Fontana to a metropolitan museum of Spanish colonial art. This is a locator diagram I put together for Dr. Fontana's book, A Gift of Angels, and locating the saints and angels and paintings and so on. So if you visit the mission, I recommend getting a hold of Bunny's book, and you will know everything about the mission that there is to know. A view from below the choir loft. You enter from that blinding white exterior and our incredible sunlight here in Tucson, and you come into this dark, pierced interior. Here's a couple of interesting elements I'll point out. One is this dado course, this wainscoting, which is painted in the primary colors in this M.C. Escher-esque disappearing geometric pattern. It actually reflects, again, that Islamic tradition in Spanish architecture that was inherited from the 8th centuries, that Spain was a Muslim country. In central Mexico or southern Spain, this would have been done with tile. Here on the Spanish frontier, on the borderlands, it was done with paint. Here's the door, the west door leads to the mortuary chapel out west. For Baroque balance, a painted door was located just opposite to maintain symmetry. And then, of course, the procession of the church through the length of the nave up to the high altar, which is the culmination of the church. I mentioned the vaults. These are the arches and vaults that structure the roof. Again, San Xavier del Bac is the one Spanish mission in the United States that's entirely roofed with masonry vaults and domes. A view of the high altar. This particular photo is by Ed McCain. The previous one was one of mine. Ed lighted the building professionally, and he took these photos actually in the evening, so it kind of heightens that sense of mystery. But the high altar, the retablo mayor, is basically a reprise of the front facade with these engaged estipite columns with the inverted pyramids at the base, and 4 niches. These have, the upper 2 saints I remember. It's Pedro y Pablo, Peter and Paul. When you see up close, St. Peter has the keys to the kingdom. God the Father on top instead of St. Francis Xavier. This is Mary, the Immaculate Conception. In this little niche, there are roses without thorns. And this is the patron saint, Francisco Xavier. Looking from the sanctuary back down the length of the nave to the choir loft, we see the guardian lions at the sanctuary. Now, these are actually replicas from the late 80s. Unfortunately, the original lions were hacked off by a homeless man who was hanging around the mission, and he chopped them up with a hatchet and hauled them off in the desert and burned them. And that's when the church started to be locked at night. It was left open year-round, night and day, until that happened. And actually, the lions were restored by an art restorer, Gloria Giffords, who had the lions sculpted in Mexico. I believe it was in Morelia, Michoacan, by a family that makes carousel animals. And then she refinished them and gilded them. This is gold leafing on the lions. And it's also noteworthy that Gloria Giffords, the art restorer, is the mother of Gabrielle Giffords, our congresswoman from Southern Arizona. This is a very telling detail. This statue was made of molded brick and plaster and painted with earth colors. And it's an indigenous angel. This is a reminder that this church is as much a Native American building as it is a European building. It's of this place. It's of the Tohono O'odham Nation, and it's definitely our treasure. It's I would say it's our Sistine Chapel for its interior, its artwork, and for me, from the exterior, it's also our Taj Mahal. And we're very fortunate to have this lovely building and all of its artwork here in our part of the world. So thank you for your interest and your attention, and maybe we'll meet you someday. Good luck to y'all. Thank you.